Hey everyone, welcome to Third Thursdays. Most of you already know, so I can keep this nice and short, but I am Michael Chovan-Dalton, the director of the JKC Gallery and the host of Third Thursdays. And of course, our curators and moderators are Heather Palasek and Habib Suab, and they are going to talk a little bit more about it and introduce the guests. Just to let you know, the gallery is going to reopen on January 20. All right. Oh, hold on. We have to mute someone here. Okay. The gallery is reopening on Monday. So what is that? The 24th? I think the 24th. And we'll have regular hours Monday and Friday, 10 to 2. The current show, Homecoming, is extended to February because we were shut down for so long. So you can come see that. Visit jkcgallery.online to register for a visit. We are checking vaccine cards. If you have it on your phone, a photo of the docket app, however you have it, that will do. All right, take it away. I think Habib's going to go next. Yes. And if Habib's not here, Heather will go.
Present.
There you are.
How's everyone doing? The crowd's going crazy. I can hear everybody. First and foremost, I want to say thank you guys for joining us and Happy New Year's. I hope everything you did in December, how you celebrate the holidays were awesome. You spent it with loving ones, maybe by yourself, maybe with a cat, who knows, but you're here with us today. This Third Thursday event is a child of me and Heather's. We come together every third Thursday of the month. We try to get two photographers together and talk about their work, whatever they have going on, whether it be a project or just shoots that they have. This show tonight is going to be crazy. Without further ado, I'm going to throw it to my partner, Heather.
Thanks, Habib. Hi, everyone. I'm going to do a real quick intro to our two amazing artists and then have them get started. They're the important ones tonight anyway. But Habib and I have curated two artists that I personally find just absolutely inspiring. So I'm so excited to welcome Ryann Casey and Flora Fanzutti. Both of which I have met in person and have had the pleasure of seeing their work in person as well. I met Rhianne for the first time a few years ago. She's a close friend of the gallery's, being a teacher at Mercer County Community College, and had a solo show called Loss Event. And I was able to see her speak about her work and was just blown away and fell in love with her and her artistry. So I'm very happy to have her here. And I think that her work really flows well and is an amazing pairing with Flora's. Flora is joining us from France. So in a special big thank you to her. It is Friday in France, actually. It is 12:30. So she's joining us from quite far away, and her work is incredibly amazing. I met her through the Experimental Photography Festival, and we were able to finally meet in person this past summer and enjoyed a really incredible week together at the festival itself. So I'm very excited for you to see and hear from both of those artists. I don't want to tell you too much about their work and how they connect, because I think you'll see that for yourselves. So excited to introduce them. We're gonna have Flora go first and Rhianne go second. So as always, Flora will do about like a 20-minute presentation. Rhianne will do about a 20-minute presentation. And then our last 10 minutes tonight of the event will be a Q&A. So during their presentations, please open up that chat box. You can type comments in as they're speaking. You can ask questions that come to mind while they're talking. And then Michael will moderate and go through all of the questions at the end for us. And then if you're ready, Flora, you are welcome to say hi and share your screen.
Hi. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the welcoming and for the opportunity to talk about my work. And I'm really happy to meet Ryann as well, and to ask her more questions after. So I'm going to share this. Is it working?
Yes.
For you? So I'm going to talk more specifically about one of my latest projects called Vedute Series. it's one of the picture that you can see. So it's named after the 18th century paintings that through the window or the telescope, and involving all this presence of an observer and this feeling of the perspectives. But maybe I can show you and explain a bit more about other projects that led me to this one. So, oh, it's not working. Yes. So I can define my practice as exploring the living matter of photography, because I consider photography as a moving medium and living medium. For me, it's alive as our memories, and their physical existence can be transformed through time as well. So I'm exploring and manipulating the supports and the connection or the possible dialogue between the support and the subject. So here you can see one project called Erosion. It was a series about revealing the inner complexity of these portraits by degrading them each time with a unique recipe. And this recipe was inspired by the people I shot, and they were inspired by the relationship with some ingredients or natural material. Yes, important things in their everyday lives. So I will take this information, then use them to create a recipe to degrade the negative of the portrait. This work is supposed to be shown at a very big scale. So that means when you see this work through Instagram or even my website, it's not big enough. So you cannot dive in the portrait and see all the details. And it's supposed to be shown at a big scale, so you can see the whole portrait from far away, and you can come closer and lose the portrait, maybe even dive in and see all the details. Yeah, so all these details they're created by reaction of the chemicals on the negatives, and I have no 100% control on this. These are some other portraits of Erosion and some close-up. So you can have an idea about the details, but it's not big enough on the screen. So this series is finished. I don't shoot anymore for this series, and I don't want to create recipes to be reproduced. I'm really I'm not interested in doing the same recipe to get the same result or aesthetic. I really want to explore and be surprised and be lost as well. So this is some example when I work on the negative to degrade with water or some cooking ingredients or household ingredients. There's another work called Verde Series. It's a poetic story of a landscape blown up by the wind. This work was made from images taken in Iceland when I endured a very, very cold wind, and the series was made with the modellage technique. So I degraded the medium format negatives, and I lost more than half of my negatives during the process. So this was another kind of project where I was degrading the negatives and playing with the deepness between the support and the image. So this is Verde again. And another work just before going into the Vedute series, it's important because it's a series called Landscapes. They're made from exploration in high resolution scans from chemical reaction on photosensitive supports. So I have like a lot of different cookings involved as well. And in this series, I'm looking for the links between what's very small, because I'm zooming into the scan, but they're creating a landscape like white space or places. So they're from, sorry, it's been late. They're from abstract material, but by cropping inside, I'm creating some mental landscapes or images. And yeah, some landscapes could be seen from space, or maybe very small cells as well. You know this one, Heather. So I can explain. I don't know if I'm taking too much time.
You're fine.
And fine, thanks. The Vedute series I'm going to talk about, it's made, I mean, it's not made from a traditional camera. Taking landscapes in real life. I used degraded negatives from old series or archives, and I explored them through this kind of microscope with big format, large format camera on the top. So I started with this abstract material, and I was interested into suggesting images by shaping all these lines, spots, textures, or light within this round frame. And I could have done rectangle images, but I was interested with this round frame referring to the long observation view, for example, as explorers, sorry. So in this work, I'm also looking for confusing distances by connecting the feeling of very small with big or distant landscapes. For this work, maybe, or you probably see the images big. In fact, the prints are quite small. They're 3 by 5 inches by 4 by 7. So that means you need to come very close to be able to see all the details. But the lines and the perspectives, they're suggesting some landscape as you could watch them from far away. And the mental landscapes activated by this series, they often inspired by the Arctic or ocean explorations, and also by the photographic history. This is also a work taking part in another project. It's a mixed media book about exploration, mixing photography, fiction, documents, and so there's always a link between my projects. And they, yeah. So if I could maybe define my point with all these works, if I'm questioning the limits of photography, maybe it's more about exploring the living connections involved with the media, with the support, and with us. That's what makes sense to me and gives me the strong feeling of being alive and connected to the world as well. So all these images, they're made from abstract material, and I see things, maybe you see other things, but I hope this work could maybe gives like an exploration feeling for the people. So each image is unique. I don't shoot like 15 papers. It's made on papers, photo paper, directly on the microscope. And I do it just once, and that's it. And after I lose the spot, because the spot is so small on the negative, I can't find it again. So I discover a spot, I shoot a picture, and after I say goodbye. And that's it. I don't know if it's too short or not. Is that okay?
No, it was perfect,
yeah,
Flora.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much. I love that series of work. So it's such an honor to be able to hear you speak about it again.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So there are a few questions in the chat, but I think we'll get to them afterwards, and we'll let Rhianne go ahead and share her work.
Great.
Hi, everybody. Hello. I'm Ryann Casey. I'm an adjunct professor here at Mercer, also at Stockton University. And I sort of come to this presentation with work that I've been doing since I was an undergrad, because I thought it'd be nice to kind of see the sort of way I sort of got to where I'm currently at, and also for students who I know are in attendance to kind of see how drastically your work can change over the course of just a few years. So I'm going to start there, and then, hopefully you have questions, feel free to put it in the chat. So I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to start like way back and with some of the work that I did in undergrad, just to kind of show you how things have sort of moved in this direction. All right, so everyone see my screen? We're good there. Okay, perfect.
Yes.
All right, so talking a little bit about my work, I was trying to figure out a way to sort of consolidate like all the years I've been making art and like what it's all about, because I do think generally there's a thread through most of our work, even if it's over decades. And so one of the things I came away with is that no matter what work I've been doing or the sort of process I've chosen to take on, I've always been really interested in things like memory. And I realized that a lot of what I do is to produce change, and whether that's like a collective change or a personal change, I think a lot of it is sort of propelled from a need to express myself, but also to sort of reach out and have those conversations. I always like to tell this little bit of a story in my classes that, you know, I started as a kid with like a stutter, and I was a shy kid. And photography became this sort of like catalyst for me to talk to people, and allowed me to get more political. And I think all those things really factored into why I started photography. And a lot of the work that I saw as I was looking over from undergrad to now is sort of talking about having that conversation with the audience. And so that's a little bit of where I wanted to start, and then we can kind of get into it from there. All right, so I'm going to start like way back from when I graduated undergrad. I trained under Wendell White at Stockton University. And I think if you've seen his work, I think it's very obvious that he was hugely influential in sort of the approach I took to my work. Most of it was documentarian to start. But one of the things I was really interested in that I think definitely came from him was the idea that you need layers to your work, right? It's not just about the image, it's what other information can you provide, whether that's additional text, whether that's, and we'll see in a little while, additional glass. And so this first work, I basically went and photographed and interviewed women who had confronted challenges and conflict in their life. And this is very much in sort of the way I look at gender in our society and some of the sort of implications of sexism. And so this is just one example of it. And the way it was presented is how you see it here, is that there would be basically 4 questions I asked every person, and they answered it from there. And what this series sort of taught me was the idea that people respond to more information, and people respond to vulnerability and openness. And that becomes, I think, for me, a really important aspect of everything I do. When I started grad school, I eventually worked under Alan Frame at Pratt Institute. And I think one of the things he gave me, similar to Wendell, was the fact that you really need to be vulnerable in your work. And that becomes a really important thread, no matter what process. And so you can see the previous one, I was working in silver gelatin paper in the darkroom. And then I sort of, again, continued using C-prints and film. That's primarily what I use. I do use some digital work, but that's mostly what I've been working with most of my career. So this series was really based on the idea of going back and interviewing exes and people I've had, you know, just conversations with about romance and friendship. And the idea behind this series was sort of confronting intimacy and what that looks like. And so the series was really pretty difficult because I had to go back and interview people I didn't necessarily want to see, or people that I had left on bad terms. And so it was really sort of this exploration where, can you be vulnerable to hear the truth about what impact you had on that person's life? Whether it's going to be good or bad, you really actually don't know. So this was basically photographing a variety, a couple of different people. There was a total of 8. And I photographed them close up and from behind doors, and just sort of kind of emphasize the idea that in relationships, we have this closeness, but when things are lost, distance becomes a really essential element of a lot of the work that you do after a relationship ends. And so this was a combination of me both photographing them in portraiture, but also photographing the impressions that were left on their beds afterwards. And so that, I think, again, sort of made me explore a little bit of the idea that portraiture can be a bit beyond just, you know, a face or a body. And so I started exploring that a little bit more when I moved into glasswork. And this is something that was kind of happening underneath a lot of the portraiture, and the more straight photography I was really interested in experimentation. I had taken an alt process class at Stockton as an independent study with Wendell. Then at Pratt, I took a full year of it. So I had tried platinum and palladium. I had tried Van Dyke. I had kind of tried it all. And that sort of a sense of experimentation felt like I can go somewhere with it. And it was actually in a failure that I sort of stumbled onto this next part of my work. So starting about a decade ago now, I started inking on glass. I had screen printed previously. You know, I screen printed things like, you know, like shirts or patches or what have you, but I've never had screen print anything for art-wise. And so how this came about is I was working with liquid emulsion and it was not working. Like, and I was like a month away from the exhibition going up. So a pivot I made, and it was a suggestion by my partner, was like, well, what if you tried to ink on glass? What if you try to screen print on glass? And I was like, well, I've never done that before. And so that was sort of the next step in the evolution of the work. What you're seeing here, and I do apologize, it's really hard to photograph these particular pieces because what you're seeing here is basically a silver gelatin print on the back, a glass over here that's using plastique, plastisol, which is like a kind of ink that screen printers use for mugs and things like that. And so I started creating this a little bit of 3D with the image. So it would take aspects of the image and ink it on the glass and then add different components like a person. In this one, it is interesting. My best friend, one of my best friends actually features pretty predominantly in a lot of these images. This is him both on his bike as well as in the park. And so I started kind of playing with that a little bit. The one on the right-hand side has 2 panes of glass. And so I started working a little bit in that way. And then gradually I started moving to bigger pieces that utilize things like color and more panes of glass as well. And so just to kind of show you a little bit of what that looks like, because like I said, it's really difficult to show these works. This is an animation my partner made for me to show what that process is. And so basically all the frames were custom and are custom. And so when you pivot and look at it from different angles, you start seeing all the layers of glass. So it creates sort of this idea of 3D, but with a really stark environment. The series that the glass work is part of is really all about environmental degradation and about the idea that these spaces that are grand and beautiful are very likely not going to be around forever. And in fact, the likelihood is they're not going to be around, pretty soon that's going to be an issue. And so I started photographing various natural spaces and trying to figure out like what kind of us humans, like what our interaction with it is. And so this is just kind of one example. And I think it's probably the best way to view a piece like this in person, if you can't do it in person. So this is just sort of an example of that. Eventually though, the work morphed into these much larger pieces. Just to show you a little bit of the process, because I do think even though the process I think is not as important for me, it does become really fun. So this work, which is sort of the more recent work, is really about sort of creating these larger pieces. They mimic in a lot of ways windows, especially windows in churches. And what I'm kind of showing you here is basically this is the original image. This is the transparency or negative I build for the screen. And just to kind of show you that I'm working in digital at this point, and then screen printing on glass, but seeing like I'm moving in and out of a lot of different types of work. And then eventually those two things that you just saw are made into something like this. So this piece has 4 panes of glass, 2 panes on each side. And there are elements of it, and I gave you a close-up over here to see, that are sort of bringing out different parts of it. And what it does is it not only darkens the image and it sort of blocks our ability to see the landscape. I think it's important to interrupt the idea that these landscapes will always be there. And I think that's part of that process for me. Environmentalism and the idea of like, humans' impact on the world, I think is a really isolating idea. And that's something I continue to go back to in a lot of the work that I do, especially in this work. And one of the things that kind of came out of this is I started getting way more interested in natural spaces. And about probably midway through the glass work, I started going to national parks, specifically with a friend of mine who was a couple years prior a park ranger, forest firefighter. So we started kind of going to these parks for the first time, and that really started making me think a little bit more about this idea of environmental degradation, environmentalism, climate change. And in fact, this idea of destruction, even in these really pristine places, became kind of a common element in a lot of the glass work. But loss event ties also into a sort of, personal element as well. This is an installation view of the first time I showed this work, which was at the JKC Gallery a few years back. And so the work started out basically from a loss that I had about 6 years ago. And just to kind of show you a little bit more about what it is. So Sarah, the woman that I mentioned before, she had passed rather suddenly and pretty traumatically. And so like in the year after that, it became really difficult for me to work. I probably stopped working for about 2 years. Like I couldn't really work on anything successfully. And then I it was kind of odd though, within about 2 months of her passing, I went to the Grand Canyon for the first time. And I started kind of thinking about that contradiction of being in the most incredibly beautiful space and still feeling exceptionally isolated and just upset. And I think that duality of that experience was the inspiration for Loss Event. And so what I started doing about a year afterwards is I just sort of made a list, and I said, okay, well, I'm going to go photograph the national parks. I'm just going to do it, you know, and I have this sort of feeling of what it's going to be, but I don't know yet. And so about 6 years ago, I started that process. I'm about halfway through. COVID has definitely thrown a wrench in a lot of the plans, unfortunately. But as I started doing the project, it became more and more apparent that the exhibition, the work in this series was not only about her death, in a little bit mine too. I mean, I think that's something we don't always talk about, but we do become instantly different people when we lose someone we love. But it's also about this loss of land and this kind of loss of the environment that we're seeing happen so frequently. And what was really stunning to me over the years is how much we think the national parks are like, well, that's the one place that's going to be okay, right? I mean, that's the thing that's going to last. And when you go, you realize that's actually not true. Whether it's overpopulation, whether it's significant, states kind of encroaching on land rights, whatever it is, the national parks are as fragile, even in their pristine state, as any other green space, at least in our country. And I'm sure that definitely holds true for a lot of places around the world. And so when I started making that work, it became really important to sort of address that loss in both environment and on a personal level. And I think, again, a project like this requires quite a bit of vulnerability and the ability to also to be open with people and to not shy away from having those hard conversations. A lot of the work that I do as a curator also deals with memory and loss and trauma. And so for me, if you're going to do this, you have to go all in. And I think this project maybe really fundamentally understand that. And so this is one of the first pieces. I'm showing you sort of an installation view of it because like everything else, layers are a really important part of my process. And so when you look at the piece in person, you'll see what's called a lith print, which you can see over here. And in addition to that, you have written in gold leaf, you have a quote. What I tried to do with this is I tried to make each piece not only speak to that environmental degradation and destruction, but also speak to Sarah's impact on that. So in addition to having obviously the name of the park, which you can see here, I actually went through all the letters because we were avid letter writers. We actually, in fact, exchanged books of writings together, like snail mail, like actually put it into the mail. So we did that for, the 15 years we were friends. And so I just kind of went through all that stuff and I took excerpts out of the letters we had written each other, her writing specifically, because she was a poet, and just different fragments of things she had written me. And so every piece has a fragment of basically something that she wrote. And so with every title, you can see here, Wind Cave National Park, it's somewhat unmanageable, but it's like I'm rearranging things in my soul to make a place for a new way of life. And that essentially is where her impact, in addition to the subject matter, but where her impact is sort of always seen. And I think it's really important to have that as part of the framing device as well, because I wanted to feel like you are getting to see a moment in that relationship, in that friendship. And one of the things that I think is really interesting that maybe ties a little bit into the earlier presentation is that I didn't want each image to be beautiful, because it wasn't a beautiful experience. And I don't mean like national parks are great. I feel really privileged to be able to travel like that. But there's always a moment or two moments or three moments when I visit these spaces where it's like deeply upsetting and like I cry. And so I think part of me wanted to make sure that it wasn't me showing these sort of images of grandeur and that was it. Like I wanted it to be something more. And so for me, so much of national parks and so much of photography is about making things beautiful. in about that sort of grandness and scale. But for this series, I wanted to emphasize imperfection and emphasize distortion and emphasize degradation. I really wanted to talk about how these spaces were as much about beauty as they were about loss. And I wanted to interrupt that experience for the viewer. And so I wanted to give it just an example of how I did that to kind of see where things are coming from, because lith printing, I don't think a lot of people are necessarily lith printing frequently, but lith printing is very difficult because you never get the same result. Like even people who are famously good at lith printing, is very difficult, if near impossible, to get the same lith print twice. And in fact, part of the lith process is actually sort of muddying the waters of the image. And so just to show you an example of what I mean, on the left-hand side is an image I took at Yosemite. It's like the classic Adams image. This is a silver gelatin print made on Art 300 fiber paper. So this is kind of pre-lith. And I use a process called second pass lith, which basically means that I process everything first, and then I bleach it, and then go back through a lith developer to get to my end. But what's challenging about it is the lith developer always changes by the number of prints you put in, by the time it is, by the temperature. And the bleach changes it too, in sometimes very sort of different ways. And so oftentimes you have to print, like this is a straight print, that's sort of exactly what it should be. But I typically have to print images like this about 2 to 3 stops darker than I normally would to be able to get anything to lith, which you see here. And so what you're looking at is the combination of taking, again, what I think is historically a beautiful space, and this is part of like our national history, and making it degraded, right? Making it less clear, and very, very similar, in fact, to what I think happens in a significant loss, is that memory fades and aspects of it are always really difficult to look at. But again, there's a challenge in looking past or looking back in a lot of our memories, especially of our loved ones. And so I think that experience is really important. To reinforce that idea, I also typically use the wrong lens for my negative. So instead of using a 75mm lens in my larger, I typically use like a 50, which requires me to kind of like, it starts making actually the edges a little bit less clear. And so, you know, almost like a vignetting, a blurring. And so I'm constantly sort of trying to add that element. And I also use Art 300 paper, which is a threaded paper. It's really thick, and I'll show you a picture of it in a minute, which also, again, reduces that clarity. And so the next step I do is I also wax it with museum wax to be able to keep the lith actually kind of, you know, solid or stable. But that also adds an element to it that you typically don't see. Now, this is sort of a comparison, but here are some other works. And you can see in each piece, it's titled by the park, but it's also given a quote from a letter or book that was written by Sarah. The pieces are 20 inches by 20 inches. The frames are 30 by 30. If you kind of scroll back for a second, you can see the installation of that. And again, the text that you see here is written in gold leaf. That's really specific because Sarah was a jeweler and she used gold actually pretty frequently. So that ties pretty much into my relationship with her as well. And so what I'm looking for in terms of imagery is in all of the sort of experiences I have in these parks, I'm looking for like 3 sets of things because there's 3 series that will come out of this project. And for this series, I'm looking for beautiful vistas, you know, beautiful cloudy days too. So you have like the perfect look at that park. So I can basically bring it into the darkroom and make it less pretty. And so it's really a sort of, you know, pushing the envelope, I think, of what lith printing can do. And I think the more gritty and the more, you know, heightened in terms of the contrast it gets, the more interesting the image becomes. And of course, I am playing a little bit historically with the shape because of the Kodak 1 and just this history of national parks and photography. So hopefully those combinations you know, talk not only about the personal loss and the personal connections I have, but also with sort of political and the environmental issues that we have in our lifetime. And so I wanted to kind of end my presentation on what I think is my favorite image from the series so far. This is Mesa Verde National Park. For me, not only was this space just incredibly important for me to go to, I had actually traveled here by myself. Part of the trips were actually alone, some weren't, but this one was. And what was sort of interesting about this trip was the fact that it was like the first time I was by myself for like over a week and a half with like literally no one to talk to, which isn't like an issue, but it was interesting. That was the first time that had happened since Sarah had passed. And so this was one of the first parks I went to. And what was just really incredible about it is that this was like in the middle of summer and it started snowing in the middle of the park. So everything was slushy and gritty and kind of gross for a while. And one of the images I took right after it stopped snowing was this one. And I thought that was such like a really, it spoke exactly to what my relationship with this project is, which is, you know, I know a lot of people think about a project like this and the vulnerability and grieving through these parks as maybe therapeutic, and it's really not, it isn't at all. But it does sort of get you in touch with those emotions, and it's less likely that you're able to avoid them. And so this is one of the vistas I went to, and just to kind of show you a little bit about that paper that I chose, this is R300, you can see, you can actually see the texture of it, and that's a really important element. So when you come up to the pieces, you can really see that's not flat, right? It's something else. And so this is the first part of the Lost Event series. I call it Lost Event because I do think it's a very specific moment that brought me to this series. And I do think speaking openly about grief is a really important process, and that's definitely important for me in terms of this work. But this is one of 3 projects that will come out of it. I'm currently still working on this. I went back to the glass work I showed you before, and I'm making large glass pieces from some of the content from the parks. But I'm also, one of the other things I did in the park is I started really looking for scenes or images of destruction, of isolation, since again, those were very much emotions that were connecting to me. And so one of the pieces that I was sort of recently working on is this one. This is a large scale, this is a 6x7 negative. It's a silver gelatin piece, 24 by 30. And this is the Mesa Verde National Park. It's one of the many images I took that same day. But what I sort of looked at in these parks, I started photographing wildfires that had happened, destruction from humans kind of walking through traffic. And so the other part of the project is starting to develop is this sort of these large, you know, film-based prints, silver gelatin prints that I'm doing in the darkroom, and really looking at the way that starkness and isolation can be expressed in the vistas or the environment of these parks as well. And so this is sort of the new phase. I'm still working on the other ones, but this is kind of what's next. And I photograph them in a very, you know, specific way to kind of make a stark sky while having a lot of detail on the bottom and having very little, if any, like sign of life. I think that's actually an important element to me. So this is one of many that will kind of come out of this project. And that's kind of where I'm at now. I'm not watching the chat, so there might have been questions that came up, but this is sort of where I think is a good point to end. I do think that, you know, from those of you who have followed my work, I do think photography and art can contribute to radical social change. And I think that can be both social change in terms of environmentalism and the destruction that we humans are sort of placing on the world around us. But I also think social change can be personal as well. I think talking about grief and mental health are important elements of doing the work that I do. And so hopefully through my curatorial projects in this, hopefully that's something that some of you walk away with. So that's it for me. Hope I didn't go over my time. Hopefully that was enough. All right.
That was great.
I never know if it's enough or too much, so I apologize if it was too much. I'll stop sharing from here. There we go.
No, it was perfect, Rhiann. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Amazing, both for the artists. Yeah, the way you presented that and the process, I'm like, I just had to shut the fuck up and just listen. I'm just like, oh my gosh, like this is the layers of your work is just, oh man. Thank you so much for that. Definitely a vulnerable opening up.
Yeah, I mean, like, listen, I tell a lot of my students this, and, I got this from Alan Frame, and he once said to me when I was struggling to find a topic, he said, what are you most scared of talking about in your work? And at that point, it was intimacy. I mean, it was, so that was what it was hard to talk about. And I confronting that, I think, made me realize that being vulnerable in your work is important, and being open with your work, being authentic in that, even if it's messy and hard, is really important. And I think that's something I've taken with me since his class. And it's hard to be vulnerable. I mean, Heather was there Michael was there for the first show. It was rough. I mean, it was very rough. But
and you were also being broadcast, right? It was on a podcast.
Yeah, I was recording the whole thing for a podcast.
No, and it's definitely one of those things where I listened to the episode afterwards, and I was like, this was a terrible idea on my part to, like, first time out talking about this series and about, like, the death of a very important person. I'm going to be recorded, so, but I guess at the end of the day, being vulnerable, and I think we as a culture are so bad at being vulnerable and being okay with being vulnerable around other people, that I guess I'm willing to step out and try it. And hope that other people feel like they might have the space to be able to do the same. Yeah.
So we do have some questions and lots of comments, lots of great comments. Flora, we'll start with you because obviously the early ones came in for you. Two people, Diane Boss and Sharon, asked, how large are your prints? Because you mentioned, Instagram doesn't do them justice. How large are the prints? I don't remember.
If it's the big ones for Erosion series, they can go from 60 it's in centimeter, sorry, 60 centimeter, and I can go to 2 meters, so that can be very large. And for the round ones, it's very small. I mean, it's 9 by 12 centimeter for the rectangle. So the round is like 5 centimeter.
And you said something when you were talking like this series is done. Was
the
that
Erosion?
Yeah. Was that because you felt like you couldn't make something else that wouldn't be repetitive, or do you have another feeling about when something's done?
I think no, I'm sure I can find other recipes to get other aesthetics. That's not the point, but yeah, I felt maybe that was okay. I had like 30 portraits selected, and because I need to show them with that big scale, there's no point just to produce 100 portraits. It's impossible to show them all together. It's too big. And yes, it was also repetitive in the content as well. There's something with the kind of portrait. The degradation can be very different from one to another, but maybe there was something within this shooting repetition that was enough for me. I needed to show something else as well. Yeah. So I decided to just stop this one.
Well, Juho said these are magnificent. Heather has one on her wall, apparently. Gary Soretsky said, wonderful approach to photography, disrupting the field of photo conservation that tries to prevent erosion. Heather said, I definitely get the feeling of exploration through each of them, the circular framing. Carol Dunn said, thank you. And then Kenneth Falk gave you hand claps. Habib said, very cool. And then we moved to some of the comments and questions from Ryan's work. Bridget Laudian.
Before, could I ask a question?
Oh
so
yeah,
Flora?
please. I'm sorry.
Just to speak a little bit, since your old work was so large, and I've seen your new series, it's very tiny. Maybe you could speak to your experience of changing formats so drastically. I know it's a personal question, but do you like working so small? Is it more difficult?
I like to try different things and different approaches. So for me, it's quite the same. I mean, the prints can be 2 meters long or 5 centimeters. There's still the same try to connect the wide and the very small. So you have to come closer, or you have to see the image from far away. And for me, it's to create or to activate this feeling of your own position between the world and the image, and what you can imagine as well. And so I like to change support techniques and formats. It doesn't matter for me to choose one of these things. I mean, the important things for me, it's to activate the links and to activate this feeling of being alive and being an observer in the world. And I don't know if it's
on my bucket list officially now. Like I have to see it in person. Like I'm like 2 meters, so I had to take myself back to grade school. I was like, that's holy shit. Like I would love to see your work, and I know just how amazing it looks. And even the smaller work, that's amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. But 2 meters, it's very hard to exhibit. And to produce as well, because it's quite expensive. So.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's almost as tall as me. Like that's huge.
So Bridget Laudian asks of Ryann, I absolutely love the concept behind histories. What moved you to begin that project?
I knew Bridget would want to dig deeper into that one. Because we have very similar brains. No, I started that because, very, very openly, I think that I had a lot of issues committing to people outside of my family, obviously, and my friends, but and I thought there was always this sort of distance that was there. And I thought by exploring where I think I had the most issues, which was in romantic relationships, sort of figuring out why that was the case and whether people actually picked up on it, and I talked to people I was in relationships, long-term relationships with. I talked to people who I had crushes on, but they didn't have those feelings for me, people who had crushes on me, and I didn't have those feelings for them, to sort of try to explore that idea of intimacy in all these different ways, and to actually have really open conversations about those feelings. And it was really hard. Like I said, I've burned some bridges in the past, and having to confront your behavior in that is difficult. But what it gave me a sense of is that, first of all, that you can kind of do anything when you do that. Like if you're willing to talk to all your exes, you're kind of fine. You'll be fine. But the fact that you're able to do that, but also be able to have these conversations that in the relationship I didn't have. And I think for me, that was a really important part of it. And I think it's really about exploring. And I think it eventually happened after I got to grief counseling, but like to get to the root of it. And I think that was the start of that process for me. Yeah. It was not comfortable though, at all.
Doesn't sound like it.
No. Because you also, just as like, just not behind the scenes, one of the reasons why I chose the process I did was because I wanted to be real. So I have a 7.2. So I shot, Fujifilm, And so I had like a single bounce strobe in front of them, but I had to be fairly close with my camera, probably only maybe like 2 feet away. So when they're talking and their reactions in those close-up images are directly to me, because I'm what they see. And because of my camera, it's a rangefinder, I'm actually away from it. So it's not blocking it. And so that was interesting too. Yeah, because you pick up on definite feelings they have about things. So,
reactions to you, yes.
Yeah.
I'm gonna gloss over some of the really nice comments just to get to the questions. Ali Wilson asked, how many layers of glass would you typically use? What's the most you've used? So obviously it's the layered images.
Yeah, so I started with 1 layer glass, but I quickly realized that it wasn't enough. And so generally I typically use 2, but I've gone as far as 4. There's a custom piece, I didn't put it in here because the thing about the glass work is probably that's the stuff that's sold the most out of anything I've ever made. Like I actually don't have pictures of the majority of work I did over like a 5-year period. But some of those pieces, there's this foldable piece that I did. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen like naturalists, like suitcases, like old school, like Darwin, like naturalists. So a friend of mine who built all my frames, Josh Robeson, he built this piece that basically folded into itself. So it was 4 pieces and each of them had 4 panes of glass. And so that's the most I've used. That's a little bit too much. I think 2 to 3 is probably like in the sweet spot where it's, because it gets heavy. You wind up not being able to, those big ones, the cathedral looking ones, those are like 30 inches tall. And even with 2 panes of glass on each side, it's still cumbersome. So you can't go too far or you break the frame. Yeah.
Does the image itself have anything to do with the number of layers?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the project. So Portal was really about creating spaces where, like, there's ones with fences, like, basically what I was looking for is like an entrance into a natural space, but also an obstruction to it. And so those, I think the more layers of glass, the more it fit conceptually with it. Whereas there are ones that are portraiture that I kept it a little bit more minimal, just because I wanted the portrait to still feel close versus so it really goes by like what the idea is.
So there were a lot of great comments, but also a cross comment with Flora, the idea of conservation, the environment, the work, the degradation. So I wanted people did see that in both of your work. Gary Saretsky's just said one thing, which something I said about your work back when we were hanging it in the show, that it like the first Kodak cameras that made circular images. It has, you don't usually see the images that way. And I know for those of us who teach, it's probably always a surprise when we tell students your images are round, right? They start out round.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we talked about it on the episode too, Michael, where like, there is this history of like nature photographers using that form too. And I do think it's interesting to think about using those not just for conservation, but using it as like a personal reflection and like memoir in a way too. I think it's nice to kind of interrupt a bit of that history as well.
Absolutely. So we're at 7:30. And if those of you who have to leave, I want to say thank you on behalf of Heather, Habib, and I, and our guests. But I think we'll stay and talk a little longer. And Few and Flora wanted to ask each other anything as well.
Yeah, definitely. I'm just looking through the. Oh, go for it. I'm just like, I did not read any of the chat beforehand. So
lots of nice comments for both of you.
Yeah, no, this is it's very nice. Regina, I don't know if Regina's still here, but she saw the show and I felt like she's been so supportive of the show. And
yes, thank you, Regina. Nice to be with you.
Yeah. And also like one of the nicest people in the whole world to be anywhere. So yeah, I thought I saw just a question. I just want to make sure I answer everything. A lot of yay vulnerability, which I appreciate. Thank you, Allie and Bridget as well. Yeah. I mean, I guess I'll start. So Flora, what I was sort of interested in when you were talking was, there's like there's a lot of overlap with like a lot of the ideas that we have, but I felt like I was kind of jealous in the idea, like I feel like a lot of your work is much more about exploration. Like I feel like mine is like a trek through things. Like I mean, I love it. Like I spend so much time in the darkroom, like I can't not like it, or it would be impossible. But I did like the idea that so much of what you do is exploring. And is that frustrating, or is that fun, or maybe it's a combination of both? Because I'm always curious. I always see people in the darkroom or like painting, and they're just so excited and happy about it. And I was like, no one else is as frustrated as me. So I was kind of curious, because your process is so heavily into like experimentation.
No, that's not frustrating at all, but it's not like the fiesta all the time either. It's for me, I think it's personal, but for me, it's the way I feel truly alive to practice like this, to explore, and to be able to lose control, to accept all the accidents and the unknown, so I can discover new places. And I want to be surprised within the process. I don't want to go somewhere I already know or I already projected. And in fact, when I decide to end a project, is quite often when I feel I know more and more what I'm going to see, or to what I'm looking for. If I'm exploring something, but in fact, I know what I can capture, or what I can come back before going there. So the point is not as exciting. So for now, no, it's not frustrating. It's really good feeling. But I think when I'm frustrated, maybe I will change the project and try something else.
I just think that's so interesting, because like I feel like I thrive in frustration. I don't know if that makes any sense. Like and I'm also like a perfectionist. So lith printing, when I was saying like, oh, you can't get the same result, that is like 8 hours a day of me being frustrated, right? Because I can't get the same result, but having to let go of that perfection a little bit, because I am like a very classic darkroom printer. Like I like things that, so it's hard to let that go. And I think lith has sort of made me do that. But I feel like I really envy people who can find that fun in that experimentation and exploration. I feel like I have not gotten there, but not in a bad way. I don't know if that makes any sense. Like the hard actually makes it feel like it's mine.
Yeah.
Which, but at the same time, I'm so curious, what other people are like in that same space. I mean, Heather, you have to you're in this conversation too, because I feel like what you do is like got to be both fun and frustrating as well.
Definitely. I think for all experimental artists, it's like that, not knowing what your results will be, not just trying things and failing multiple times. But when you do succeed, it's just this so exciting that it keeps you coming back for more and more. Yeah, definitely.
Well, so my partner always like makes fun of me, because he's always like, you never seem completely satisfied with the work. And I was like, well, I'm not. So that's number one. But also, I try to tell him, I was like, no, it's like worth it because I'm invested in it, because it is worth it to get to that end result. And he's like, so like, do you ever feel like, yeah, this is it? And I'm sure like probably so many people who are photographers in the group right now understand this part, where it's like, I have about a 3 to 5 minute window when I look at a print and it's good for where there's joy, and then at 5 minutes I'm done and I find something wrong with it. Like, but like that 5 minutes is like pretty spectacular. But like I think it's that process of, yeah, like you said, getting that print, and even if it's only 5 minutes, it definitely feels like, oh, this is worth that challenge. Yeah.
We had a new question come in for the two of you, and Preston, I'll get to yours too, but this was for both of them. Is there a feeling, this is from Rachel Dukeman, is there a feeling that comes over you when the work is complete, or an emotion that lets you know the process is done? And you kind of just hinted at a lot of that. Yeah.
You know, like yes and no. I think with the project I'm currently in, it's probably the longest project I've ever done. Like, because it's a consistent project. All the projects I've had are like segments in a much bigger thing. But Lost Event is about this one thing that I'm just like committing in I don't know how long. It could be 10 years, it could be 5 years. No, it's definitely not 5 because it's 6 already. It could be 10, 15 years. Like, and so I think I don't know when that's going to be done. I think I'll just sort of like give an example of how I know it's not done yet. I sold one piece from that show, and two wonderful human beings who were lovely. And that was probably the most upset I've been at, you know, and not at them, but more like I realized that completing this work and having to eventually let it go is going to be a really hard process. But I think when I'm ready to do that, that's when maybe the project's done. I don't know when that's going to be, but that it feels like for that project, maybe that's when it's going to be okay.
Flora?
I think the work is never completed. It's always, for me, it's always living through the next ones or the parallel ones. I produce different works and series, but in fact, it's kind of like, as all artists, I mean, it's the whole life work by different works. So they're all related and they're all nourishing all your life. So I don't know. I feel it's done. Maybe one project is done when I feel bored or when I know where I'm going and I don't want to have this. But yeah, it's sometimes I understand a work maybe a long time after I ended it. So it's never ended.
Yeah. And Flora, just as long as you're there was another question for the two of you. Sorry, Preston.
Yes.
From Kyle Lang. Who do you look to for inspiration?
I'm not looking for something in particular, but it's not only visual. Cooking, music, cinema, everything, and exploration in real life. That's very important for me. Yeah, because photography, it's the visible, but for me, the interesting things about photography, it's to feel the invisible through the visible. So music and all you can experience in your life, that's inspiration for me.
Ryann?
I mean, I think it definitely changes depending on what I'm working on at the time. I think in general, and kind of doing this presentation, because I hadn't really done like a collective of my work in a really, really long time. I started realizing that the things I looked at and the things that inspired me were any kind of artworks, music, and I think printmaking is always a big inspiration for me, because I like the idea that printmaking is so varied and supports and all these other types of processes. But I think regardless of what it is, I'm always looking for something that talks about memory and loss. And I don't want, I mean, it sounds sad, and I'm not generally a sad person, but I think like music that talks about yearning, like media, documentaries that talk about like surviving in the worst possible situations. I feel in that, being able to survive loss and trauma, there's an inspiration I get from that, wherever that's coming from. And I think that's sort of fed into my work. Honestly, the show that we did at the JKC Gallery, like that was many years of me looking at artists that felt I connected with right away, and they inspired me. And having those conversations with the artists as well. I mean, we have, Bridget, I don't know if she's still here, but Bridget was in the show too. And I think seeing how other people process those kind of experiences, because I really struggled with it to make work while I was going through that, and how hard it was. I think that's really what's gotten me through this project, to be honest.
Absolutely. That Mark of the Memory show changed the way I talk about my own work. Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, well, that's high compliment. Thank you, Michael.
So Preston asked, as long as you're here, how do you see the idea of grief in the work and how it corresponds to going through grieving? So it's kind of like the visual and the actual, right?
That's a good question. I guess. So it's a strange thing where like I don't grieve when I'm in the dark room. I know that's like a very specific thing. Like for whatever reason, the process of doing prints, like sitting there for 8 hours and then coming back another 8 hours, that for some reason, that's not a grieving process for me. But being in the parks definitely is. Photographing those parks, being in those parks, like I'm actively grieving when I'm taking those images. Like I did not expect that when I started the project. I thought I was going to be able to like somehow get out of my own head, and that definitely did not happen. So I'm, the images that people are looking at it's sometimes, and I'm sorry for everyone around me in those parks. I'm like crying while I'm photographing things. And so I think that's definitely a grieving process. I think when we had the show at the JKC Gallery, when I got in my car, that was hard. But it is weird where the actual making of the images, like the prints themselves, that's not. And so I don't know what that says about me. But and I thought about this the other day. I almost think the Parks Project was in some way me trying to make a list of something, so that way I didn't have to think about her loss. It definitely didn't work. It did the opposite. But I think that's sort of where that came from. And so maybe in the back of my head, I knew that that's what this process and this journey was going to be for me. And, like I said, it's not all sad. The parks are beautiful, but, there's about 15 minutes where it's deeply upsetting. Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you both. Heather and Habib, do you want to wrap this up?
Yeah, just immense and endless thank yous to both Flora and Rhiann. I'm feeling inspired by both of you again. So I really can't thank you enough for being here. And especially Flora, I know the time difference is probably really difficult. So thank you so much for being here with us.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, Heather and Habib, like I've been coming to these for a while, so I feel really privileged to be able to be part of it in this way. So thank you so much. And Flora, thank you for staying up so late. I mean, like I said, I lived in London for a while, and having family on this side, it's rough going. So I appreciate you being here too.
No, I'm very happy. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. This is very inspirational, Flora. Thank you, Rhiann. Thank you. And what I'm taking from this show, because every episode we have, I personally take an approach to it, and it inspires me in a different sense. And right now it's just, go with the flow when it comes down to some things. Nothing is the perfect shot. It doesn't matter if it's in focus, you know, it could be a little distorted, a little bit more gritty. Just let it ride, you know, don't overthink it so much. And though just it being that one-on-one shot and the moment and what's going on with you personally when you take it. So I thank you guys so much from the bottom of my heart. Heather, you're awesome.
You're awesome.
But Heather, really, because Heather, she was so
really,
excited
Michael,
about this.
though.
She was really excited
awesome.
about this show. She was really excited about this show, just the guests that we were having. I have a lot of personal things going on also. So, you know, with the whole COVID, we're communicating. I'm like, yeah, it's going to be a good show, you know, but the way Heather hyped it up, it's definitely going out for, like what you said, this amazing artist. Thank you guys so much. So much.
And thank you to everyone for coming tonight and being part of our community.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Guys, thank you for coming.
And a special thanks to all these students who showed up from all of us, I think, from many of us here. I love it when our students show up. Thank you.
Yeah. And my mom was somewhere in there at some point too. So that was really nice. Yeah. So my mom doesn't get to see this that often. So she's in Florida. So that's nice.
Hi, Mom. All right. I'm gonna thank you all for coming. We'll see you February 17th, where we should also have an in-person event as well, in-person and remote. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.